Today on the podcast, I'm going around the world in 80 days to every Disney theme park, anywhere, with author Dustin Engels. It's a lot of fun. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Thanks once again for joining me on this fun adventure here at the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am Dan, and we are up to episode 90. Can you believe it? This will likely be the last new episode this year, so I did want to take a moment to say thanks for being a part of this show as a listener, guest, patron, friend on social media, or any other connection that you have to the Tomorrow Society. It's been a super fun year, and I can't wait. I have some exciting ideas for ways to continue to expand what I do here on the show, and I'm excited about some of the guests that I'm hoping to bring on in January and beyond. It's a really fun time to be doing this show and connecting with all of you. Today's show continues the trend from last week, where I'm looking more at the international Disney parks. I talked to Dustin Engels, who wrote the book Around the World in 80 Days, One Fan's Journey to Conquer Disney's Magic Kingdoms, which was published in October by Theme Park Press. And what made me want to talk to him is there's some serious ambition that's needed to try and see all the Disney parks in such a short period of time, particularly when most of it was as a solo traveler. Now, going to Walt Disney World for a day or two, like I did recently as a solo traveler, not that challenging. But trying to do all these different parks and navigate various cultures, or go to a water park where a lot of the rides are raft rides, can be a challenge as a solo traveler. And I've only been to Paris as far as the international parks, which I went there back in 2006 and had a great time, but that resort has changed so much. And I haven't been able to get to any of the parks in Asia so far. So it was fun for me to get a glimpse from Dustin about what it was like to visit those parks and whether Tokyo Disney Sea is as cool as I think it would be. Spoiler alert, it is. It's just fun to talk to somebody who did so much, and Dustin has some great stories both on the show and in his book about the experience. So let's get to it. Here is Dustin Engels. All right, my guest today visited every Disney theme park around the world on epic trips over multiple months. He documented his experiences in the book Around the World in 80 Days, One Fan's Journey to Conquer Disney's Magic Kingdoms, which was published in October by Theme Park Press. It is Dustin Engels. Dustin, thank you so much for talking with me on the podcast.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Dan. Thanks so much for having me. I love the show, so this is very exciting.
Oh, no problem. I'm excited to talk with you, especially given that you've done something that I think a lot of Disney fans would love to do. I mean, I've been to Paris, but beyond that, I've only been to the U.S. parks. So for me, it's always great to hear someone or read someone that did all that. I want to dive right into that. So when did you decide you wanted to take this journey where you essentially hit all the parks in such a short period of time?
So this all kind of started, it was in late 2017. I kind of refer to it in the book as it was, I'm not quite sure if it was a midlife crisis or a third life crisis or a quarter life crisis or how you would measure it. But I just kind of decided that, you know what, I really want to do something exciting. And I just have always really, really, really loved the Disney parks. And I've always tried to figure out, how could I work for the parks? How could I get the parks in my life more than they already are. And I just really had this itch, and I had some conversations with a friend about kind of the Disney World tour and visiting all these parks and knowing that this is a thing that people do. And as I kind of started looking into it, I realized that this actually might be more attainable than you maybe think when you kind of first come up with the idea. And so I started thinking that, maybe this is a thing that I could do, but I really felt like I needed to have some sort of purpose for doing it, or else I figured my wife was going to be very she was going to be very questioning of this whole endeavor if I was just doing this for no reason at all. And so I had some experience writing, and I had published an article before, and had kind of dabbled in writing stuff, and figured, what, maybe I could actually turn this into something and document my travels. And if I wrote a book, it's only dependent on me kind of working and doing that, and I can do it in my spare time when I'm not working. And so I had this idea, and I pitched it to my wife late that year, and she said she thought that it sounded like an interesting idea. And like a lot of Disney fans, I have a whole bunch of Disney books on my shelf, and I started looking at my books, and I had a handful of books from Theme Park Press. And so I went and I looked at the website and saw that they have a form that you can fill out to submit ideas. And so all I submitted was the title, which I had come up with, which was Around the World in 80 Days. And I pitched this premise to Bob McLean at Theme Park Press of, I'm going to go to all the parks and I'm going to do it in 80 days. Really, for kind of the biggest reason was I just felt like I needed to kind of get it all done, because if I kind of said I was going to do it and I went, and then I said, I'm going to go to another park in 6 months, and 6 months after that, this thing would go on forever, and who knows, I might not finish it. So I pitched all that, and Bob came back and said, this is really interesting. Send me some writing samples. So I did that. And a few weeks later, we had signed the agreement that I'd be writing this book. And that was in January of 2018. And I started planning, and I was on my first flight in April.
That's a pretty quick turnaround there in terms of the idea. I know when you set up the trip, you split it up in kind of multiple legs. Like essentially you did, the Asia parks together, and then obviously Disney World and all that. How much planning did it take to figure out how do you want to split it? Because, people have daytime jobs and lives at home. So it's not like something I suspect that you could do all at once. You had to kind of find where you would split it up. How did that work?
You're absolutely right. I work a full-time job, and I have a family at home, and I was trying to figure out how do I do this to minimize the amount that people think that I'm crazy and the amount that I drive everyone around me crazy. And also the way in which it was most affordable. I'm an extremely frugal traveler. I mean, I say that I'm always trying to kind of maximize the trip that I can get for, a pretty affordable budget. But I'm not super crazy. Like, honestly, I'll probably never stay in a hostel in my life, which I know a lot of people get a lot of good travel doing it that way. But I just kind of sat down with a whiteboard. I had a whiteboard, and I listed all the parks. And, I was still kind of feeling out what the book was going to be exactly, what the angle was going to be. I mean, the premise itself is an angle, right? But was this going to be most of my writing had been academic writing, right? And so I was like, was this going to be an academic exploration of kind of the cultural differences of these parks? Was it going to be more of a travelogue? And it kind of ended up being more that kind of a memoir-y travelogue kind of thing. But as I was trying to figure that out, part of me was like, well, maybe it would be amazing. I mean, it would have been amazing if I could have gone to all these parks from in chronological order of when they opened. I thought that would be so cool to look at the evolution of this. But then when you look at that, you're like, that's insane. I mean, that's clearly insane just from a timing perspective and obviously a cost perspective. I mean, so I thought about that for 2 seconds and realized that was not going to be a good idea. And so then when I was kind of looking at it, so I live on the East Coast, I live in Virginia. And so, I knew it was going to be a trip to get out to California to go to Disneyland, right? And then I figure if I'm out in California, it's a much easier trip to Asia from LA than it is from Virginia or from DC or from wherever. So that kind of seemed like a natural grouping there. And then when I did some shopping around, I realized I could get really great flights. Basically, I hit Anaheim, then I went to Shanghai, then I went to Hong Kong, then I went to Tokyo, and then I went back to Richmond. And all of that I did on 3 airline tickets that cost me $1,100 total. Wow. So I looked at that and I said, like, you know what? That is very doable. Other than being totally crazy in terms of I just destroyed my feet over the course of 2 weeks and was exhausted. And there were a couple places where I probably wished I had a little more time, but I was able to do it. It was a little over 2 weeks. So then my next leg was going down to Florida, and I actually already knew that I had a work conference that I was attending every year that just so happened to be in Orlando in 2018. So that was happening basically was a little less than a month after I got back from the first leg. So I kind of just extended the amount of time that I was going to be in Florida. And so that kind of gave me the opportunity to hit all those parks. And then that obviously just left heading to Paris. And so Paris was actually the only leg that I did not do solo. My wife had relatively recently, she had started a new job, so she didn't have as much time off as I had. So she was not able to attend any of the other parks, but she did have enough time to take a week. And so we took a week, flew to Paris, and that was it.
Wow. Well, your idea of going chronologically sounds like this great mad scientist idea because I think about it and I'm like, oh, that's cool. And then I think about Disney World. I mean, it's first you start out and you're like, this is easy. I go to Disneyland, we go to Florida, we do Magic Kingdom, we do Epcot. And then it's like, then you go, and I don't know all the years by heart, but it's like, then you go to Tokyo and then or MGM and Paris. And it's like you're jumping. Disney World kills you there.
It does.
Plus Paris has the studios. It'd be a mess.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're making multiple, like, then you're going back to California to go to California Adventure. Yeah. It's like, you know what? I'll just take care of California Adventure when I'm there. And so I think it could have been, again, it really would have depended on what kind of book I was trying to write, right? Like if this was really looking at the evolution of the parks and kind of the intersections between them and the evolution over the time, like that may have made sense. But like, again, I didn't even really know what I was doing. And so it was like, you just got to check these all off and not in a checklisty kind of way. Like I really, really, it was an incredible experience. And I had such interesting and unique and really amazing experiences at all of them. I didn't have a bad experience at a single park. So it was wonderful, but it was just, I had a goal and it was like, I just need to figure out the way that's kind of the least that kind of throws my life into the least amount of craziness over this relatively short period of what ended up being like 60 some days, where I hit all the parks.
Yeah. And you mentioned too, like figuring out what you're going to write, because to me, that would be the challenge, because I feel like what the setup you kind of did is you start out and you kind of give a history, or not a history really, but a background of the parks and what they are, and then talk about some fun stories or things you did, and then kind of weave in what you think of the attractions. But was that hard to edit it down or to find that balance? Because I feel like with something like Epcot, you could easily just talk about how it's changed. But then when you're going somewhere brand new, like Hong Kong or for you or Shanghai or something, then you're going to talk more about like, well, this is very different and here's all this new stuff. Did you kind of take a different approach to each chapter with how you did it?
I mean, I did, but I'm not sure how much of it was intentional. I mean, I don't think I knew what this book was going to be until I turned it in. It was always evolving. And I mean, it's a great question and a great point in terms of trying to figure out, I had to figure out my own my own history with the parks and what I knew about them. And obviously I knew a lot more about the parks I had been to, not just about the parks themselves and about touring them and about where to eat and what to do, but just about the history of them. I mean, in my grad program, I did a lot of writing about Disney. And, I did a lot of writing about Epcot and its kind of links to urban planning and honestly links to sustainability, sustainable planning and stuff, and all this interesting stuff that I could have gone into for 40 pages in the book and realize, I don't have 40 pages. I wanted this to be what I kept describing as a beach read, right? Like I was like, I want people to be able to pick up this book and just enjoy it, right? I want them to enjoy it the same way that I enjoyed this trip. And I don't want this to become a slog to read because it's kind of not a slog, because I know that there'd be a ton of people like me that would be really interested in all of that. But at the same time, I also knew that there are people that have done it better already, right? There's tons of people who have already written those books. But what I did was, while I was traveling, I tried to do one table service meal every day. And I would sit at that table service meal by myself and I would write in a notebook, and I would just write, these are the stories that I had and my thoughts and just little random asides and things that just popped into my head. And then when I got home, I did a bit of procrastination and I did a giant, and this is also just what I'm used to doing. I put together this giant research document where I went through and I had basically a section for every park, and I went through and read everything that I could get my hands on. I mean, within reason, kind of about the history of each of these parks and just trying to get some context for all of them. And then I took those notes and I took my stories and I kind of wrote up my stories. And then I figured out where are the gaps here, right? Like, and it kind of speaks to what you were saying. Like, obviously, in places like Shanghai and Hong Kong, I'm talking much more about my impressions of this is the first time I've ever been here. Whereas like Magic Kingdom or Hollywood Studios or whatever, I've been there many times. And so it's a much different, I was writing much different. The things I was writing were very different because they were more about kind of my personal history with the parks. And so that's kind of how I started finding it. Was I wrote what I had, and then I tried to figure out where are the gaps here, where are the things that I think there needs to be context of the histories of the park to inform the stories that I'm about to tell. And then also trying to keep in mind, like, what's the audience for this book, right? I knew there would be hardcore Disney fans who would read it, who, I didn't want to go too much into the history because I knew a lot of them would either know that or know other sources that could do it even better than I could. But then for the casual fan who might really love Disney parks but not know that much about the history, I wanted to, again, give a little bit of context there so that they're not lost on what is this park and when did it open and all that kind of stuff. So it was really just, it was a very iterative process of, writing a draft and going through and saying like, oh, wait a minute, this chapter's only 2 pages long because like I'm clearly missing something here, and trying to figure out, okay, what's the angle for this chapter that kind of contributes to the whole of the narrative that I'm telling here.
Yeah, I'm getting a little anxiety now thinking about what it would be like to try and organize all that. I'm going, I feel a little for you here. But, the thing is, you're right, because there are some people that are really into the history of every park. I've learned more about some of the parks more recently, and then there's people that just go to Disney World. So you're kind of writing for different audiences. But I'd love to know a bit more going in, like, what were you most excited about? Like, what were kind of because you'd been to Disney World and Disneyland, you'd mentioned in the book, but what were kind of the attractions or parks that were just top of the list? Like, this is why I'm doing this kind of things.
I mean, I think that obviously for most, if you're a hardcore Disney fan, Tokyo is kind of, you hear so much about it. And I just finished watching the most recent episode of the Imagineering Story on Disney Plus, which was episode 4, and looking at Disney Sea. And I mean, it so highlights why that park is incredible and why, it looks incredible from just watching it on TV, right, or reading about it. And so that was I was so excited for that. And actually that also did kind of drive part of the planning for this trip was actually the Tokyo stop, was looking at crowd calendars in Tokyo, because I had read all these stories of how the crowds can be, totally crazy and just so many people. And so you really needed to plan to make sure you weren't on a date that you couldn't actually get on any attractions. So I actually kind of planned around that. And I actually also planned around their refurbishment calendar. So they were just about to put Journey to the Center of the Earth, and it was going to be under refurbishment. I was like, I really got to ride that ride. Yeah. So that kind of drove part of the planning. But, I couldn't do it perfectly. Like Pooh's Honey Hunt was not open when I was there, which I'm sure people will notice. There's some things that were not open, and they probably, if you're a hardcore fan and you're like, oh, I gotta know what he thought of Pooh's Honey Hunt, there are omissions there that people probably say, why didn't he talk about whatever? Well, it was probably closed for refurbishment, because I pretty much rode everything at all the parks. But yeah, Tokyo was obviously a big one, and I mean Shanghai. Obviously, Shanghai was. It's obviously very new, but it was even newer 2 years ago. And so that was obviously very exciting. Hong Kong was absolutely the park that I knew the least about. And so I was that was just kind of a stop along the way, but I ended up really enjoying it for, reasons that you may not think of immediately, just that it was completely empty. And it was like having a Disney park to myself. And I've never had that experience in my life. So that was amazing. But those were really the kind of what I was most excited for. I mean, I was excited for Paris as well. I'm a huge fan, and it probably comes across pretty clearly in the book. I'm obsessed with that kind of era of Disney, and Disney War by James Stewart is like my favorite book of all time. It's just such an incredible book, and it goes into so many interesting stories and stuff about the Paris Project. And so being able to see kind of something that was so infamous, and what it has become kind of as it has found its success following that kind of bumpy road in the 90s. That was obviously fascinating and interesting. So all of it was exciting, because I was excited to go. I was excited to go to Florida, and I had not been to Florida since 2012, and I had not been to Disneyland since 2010. So it had been a while for everything.
Yeah, I mean, you got to just do Pandora and Cars Land, and those are both big things to see. Oh, and Toy Story Land.
Yes, Toy Story Land. I mean, I actually hadn't even seen New Fantasyland. So New Fantasyland was it was just about to open the last time I had gone down to Florida. So there was a decent amount of new experiences for me that I was really excited about.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you just listed like things I'm going to ask you about for the next big chunk of the podcast. So I just have to kind of go through and be like, which one do I want to ask about first? Well, let's do Tokyo Disney Sea. So, yeah, I mean, this is one where it almost seems obvious for me to be like, yeah, that's at the top of the bucket list. But I mean, nothing I've seen about that park has convinced me that it shouldn't be, because like you mentioned the Imagineering story, which I watched last night, where like you said, they're just showing sweeping footage over the park. And I'm just like, holy cow, man. It just looks incredible. And plus having the attractions like Journey to the Center of the Earth and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and some of the other ones. When you were there, were you able to take it all in, or was it almost just like too much to grasp? Because I even remember going to Paris, and I was there for one day. This was in 2006, so this was a while ago, and being like, we were there one day, and I'm like, how can I even process all this? It's too much. Do you feel like you got the full experience in the time you were there?
So there's a couple kind of things to cover here. The first is just in terms of, did I have the time to cover it? I originally had bought a 3-day ticket. So I was actually, because of the way the flights worked, I was in Tokyo for a pretty long time. I was there for 6 or 7 nights in Tokyo. And my plan was, I'm going to go to the parks for 3 days, and then I'm going to explore Tokyo for the rest of my time. From day one, I knew there's no way I can only do this for 3 days. Like I'm going to have to add an additional day. So I ended up adding a fourth day. And so I really do feel like I got a lot of time to explore those parks. I obviously would have loved to have more, but I do feel like I just got to there's so much amazing kind of transportation in Disney Sea. They've got the kind of the electric railway, and then they've got the steamers that go around kind of all the bodies of water and the gondolas. And I think it was on my last day, I really just kind of did all of that. I had already done some of it, but I did it again just to take it all in, just to take in how beautiful it is. And I just sat on those gondolas and I sat on that steamer and just kind of soaked it all in. And it's hard to express what a beautiful park it is and how it seems it's hard to even fathom how detailed it is and how complete it feels. And what kind of boggled my mind was how fully realized it was from day one. This is not a park that has undergone a massive transformation to get it to the point that it is today. This is something that opened in the same era as Disney California Adventure and Disney Studios, right? And it is so fully realized and just so incredible. It's really hard to even think of how they'll ever be able to top it. But, I detail the story in the book, but actually had a bit of a rocky start to Tokyo Disney Sea. So this is a bit in the weeds, but about ticketing at Tokyo Disneyland.
No,
but
go for it.
You actually can't. So when you go to Tokyo Disneyland, you buy your ticket, you specify what park you're going to go to on which day. So you actually can't do a hopper. If you get a 2-day ticket, you're going to Disney. You go to Disney Sea and Disney Sea, or you go to Disneyland and Disney Sea. But you're doing one on a day, and you're specifying which you're doing on which day. If you get beyond 2 days, you get a park hopper. So I had obviously planned this whole entire big trip all together, and so I had bought my ticket, I don't know, a month and some change before I actually landed in Tokyo and got to the park. And so I had specified what park I was going to. And in my brain, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go to Tokyo Disneyland first because that was the one that was there first. And so I'll go there first, and then I'll go to Tokyo Disney Sea. Well, obviously, my brain was not working the same way when I bought the tickets. And surely what my brain was thinking was, you want to go to Tokyo Disney Sea because you're very excited for it. So you're going to put that first. So I go, and it's pouring rain that morning. I actually think it was the only day of bad weather I had in my every day that I spent in a park in this book. And I did not stay at Tokyo Disneyland. I stayed at an Airbnb about a mile away, which was honestly the biggest mistake I made in the entire trip. I mean, it was a fine Airbnb, but there really was no excuse to not stay at Tokyo Disneyland. That you can get affordable rates at some of the hotels there. But I decided, you know what, I'm going to save the money. I'm going to stay at this Airbnb. So I had to ride the bus. I had this awful poncho that I had only packed one carry-on suitcase for this entire trip, and something didn't make the cut, and that was rain gear or proper rain attire. So I had one of those cheap like dollar store ponchos that's basically just a garbage bag. So by the time I get to the park, I'm just drenched and it's cold. I'm not dressed appropriately because I clearly did not check the weather. But I get to the gates. I'm waiting in line at Tokyo Disneyland. They open the gates. I get up there and they start scanning my ticket, and they're like, "You're at the wrong place." Like, what do you mean? And we open up the ticket, and sure enough, I had picked that I would be at Tokyo Disney Sea this day. So I had done all this work to get there early. I'm soaked, I'm cold, I'm whatever. I run, get on the monorail, which you got to buy a ticket for, and then I left my ticket back at it was a disaster, and you can read the full details in the book. But so I was kind of frazzled when I got there, and I was just so kind of anxious that, I wasn't going to get on stuff, and it seemed so crowded. And now I was at the back of this crowd because I was late and all this stuff. And honestly, it like melted away so quickly just because of how incredible that park is. And I just so quickly was kind of snapped back into the situation that I was in and was like, oh, you know what? This is okay. You're a little cold, you're a little wet, but you're at this amazing park that you will possibly never be at again. And so I tried to take it all in and enjoy it. And it really is an incredible achievement.
Yeah, that story is great because there's a few stories like that in the book where it's like, you're trying to get from the airport to your hotel in Shanghai, or you got pooped on at one point.
Yeah.
So I don't want to go through all of them, but I do
absolutely.
really like that story because it's just like, I also think it's the kind of thing that happens more often maybe when you're traveling solo, because you kind of have that check on things like that when there's multiple people and you're going solo and you're just like, I've got this. I'm on it. And then it's like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine. But I'm glad it worked out and you were able to enjoy it, because the little I know about it and what I've seen, I would love to get there someday. I don't know when that's going to be. I'm not going to it's expensive. You found some great deals, which I'm impressed as somebody who sometimes struggles to find good airfares just to California or Florida. That's a steal. But I have an important question for you. This is the most important question of the day about Paris.
Yes.
Why is the food so bad?
It is really baffling. I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things. So I didn't have great experiences with food in Shanghai. I had pretty bad experiences with food in Shanghai. Everywhere else, I had pretty amazing experiences. And so I obviously had not been to Paris yet, and that came at the end. But I was excited for it. I was thinking this obviously should be good. So we went and we ate it. Let's see. The package that we booked, we actually booked a package, and it came with like a half board. They were doing some promo where you got free half board. So we got a sit down meal for each day of our stay. So I was so excited to book all of this. This seemed like living in luxury compared to kind of the slumming it I had been doing in some of my other stops. And so we went to Captain Jack's first, which is basically the Blue Bayou equivalent. And the food was just not good. And so I said, well, maybe that was a fluke. Then we went to, we had food at Remy's over in the studios. Again, that wasn't terrible, but it was okay. And then our last meal was actually at Walt's, which was probably the best meal that we had, but that was still just, I don't know if it warranted the price. And it was all kind of really, really put into perspective when we spent the rest of the week in Paris and we ate all these amazing meals. And we're like, man, that really makes you even think about all those experiences again and go, how is it possible that those meals could have been so average? I don't know. Where did you go when you were there?
Well, see, what we did, and this is 2006. But we went to London and we ate there we were there for 3 or 4 days. Then we were in Paris for 4 days and ate amazing meals. Like some of those meals in Paris, regular Paris, not Disneyland Paris, were like the best I've ever had. And then we were there and we had spent a lot of money by that point. We were just kind of like, okay, we thought about trying to eat in downtown Disney. Well, that was more for dinner, but for lunch, we're like, we're just going to eat as cheap as we can. We're just going to go to this fast food place. It's like, how when you enter the studios, they have that walkthrough inside and there's a food place, a food place. And
yes,
we're like,
I know
we'll
exactly
just eat there. That'll be fine. And my wife and I talk about that is the worst meal, not just in a theme park, possibly the worst meal we've ever had anywhere. And it was $50 or something crazy, or, 40 euros for McDonald's.
Yeah.
Worse.
I mean, what's even crazy about that whole park is obviously it's very interesting is what I'll say. It's very interesting, but that section that you're talking about is called the front lot, which is what you have to cross through to get to the rest of the park, which is this insane design choice. It's the opposite of a weenie, right? It's you walk into this dark building and on the right side you got a place that smells like cheap cheeseburgers, and on the left you got these shops that don't look that impressive, and it's like, what is this? And that whole place, I mean, we did not eat there, but that whole front lot smells like the greasy food from that restaurant, so I can only assume what it must taste like.
Yeah, it's the worst. And then for dinner, we were gonna eat in downtown Disney, but again, it was just so pricey and it looked so blah that
Yeah.
it didn't look good. So we ended up eating. We had stayed in like a, and I don't want to make this all about my trip, but we
Yeah.
ended up staying in our hotel, which was like it wasn't a Disneyland Paris hotel, but it was in like the area that was like a few miles away, like where the
Yeah.
train station was. And that
Yeah.
meal was so good, and it was just like the same price, and it was like a sit down meal. So, but you mentioned the studios, and I have to ask you about that. I want to talk about the park in general, but my first question, which you bring this up in the book, I don't understand the obsession in the studio tour with Dinotopia. I just don't get it.
I had no idea I really had no idea what Dinotopia was. And I mean, again, that whole park. I mean, I know that it deserves all of the all of the skepticism and the kind of negativity that people give it. But I was so fascinated by it that I actually really enjoyed myself because I just kept scratching my head and going, this is so many misfires on top of misfires that it's hard to even imagine that
Right.
all these things could have coalesced to because if you look at the studio tour, right, you go past like the sets of Dinotopia and they show you all these videos from Dinotopia, and then you're going past the vehicles from 102 Dalmatians, and the big finale is that you go through the set of Reign of Fire. I'm like, I didn't even know that was a Disney movie. Like I didn't even realize it was a Touchstone movie or whatever it was. And so if you're writing that, I was like, I can't even imagine in 2005 that this wasn't a dated.
Oh, it was. It was.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure. And so it's fascinating. That whole park is so fascinating. I'll be really interested to see what it is like after it gets this whole revamp that is coming in the upcoming few years, because I honestly don't know. I mean, I probably will be totally wrong, but I'm not sure they can salvage it with what they're doing. You know, they're putting in I guess they're putting in like a Frozen Land, and they're putting in maybe a miniature version of Star Wars Land, but I don't know. I'm skeptical that whole park won't still be the crazy kind of mess of things that it is right now.
Well, yeah, I kind of look at it as with all of that, it's probably going to pull it up to the level of like DCA now, because I feel like if they're also going to do Marvel, I think they're going to retheme that weird rock and roller coaster that's the music video.
It's so weird.
They're going to retheme that to, it's like rock and roller coaster without the sets or the story.
Right.
They're going to retheme it to Marvel. So they're going to do some Marvel stuff there. So I suspect the draw of Marvel, Star Wars, and Frozen will help. But you got to remember, I went there before Ratatouille, before Crush's Coaster, and before Tower of Terror opened.
Oh,
so
wow.
Talk about,
That's
oh my Lord. Because those three things, I mean, the Tower of Terror is the simpler one, but that makes it crazier. But you know, yeah, I'm also really intrigued by it because I feel like, one, it's so much concrete and things are spaced out in a weird way. Like the rock and roller coaster's way in the corner and it's just this weird building.
You know, that's the thing about the comparison because I would kind of agree with you on the comparison to California Adventure. But the problem with California Adventure is like California Adventure actually had some, I mean, it's a mess of theming, and like it was misguided in terms of its, who it was trying to appeal to. Like, I'm not really sure they identify. I'm not sure who the audience was for it, but like, it also had some it had some decent sections to it, right? You know, like Paradise Pier is thematically kind of cohesive, right? Well, obviously it's not it's Pixar Pier or whatever now, but like it has some sort of like cohesion, and you know, the same with Condor Flats and all. You know, they had some spots that were at least kind of pretty. Like, I don't even know what you get out of the studios. Like you said, it's so much asphalt and concrete, and what it's like, how do you even salvage this? But I'll be very interested to see. I mean, it really was for someone who was a teenager at the time of all those kind of all those properties. You know, you're looking at the early 2000s, that it really was like a snapshot of my childhood. And so in that sense, it was a fascinating experience to relive. I mean, it really felt like I had gotten in a time machine and was back in high school and was, you know, going to this park that was weirdly trying to appeal to me, even though I didn't care about any of the properties. But then it froze there, and then it has never changed since then. So I'll be interested to see what happens with it.
Yeah, I'm trying to stay optimistic to see what they do. And I mean, quickly, they're also making a lot of changes to Hong Kong. They're going to be bringing in Frozen and Marvel, more Marvel there too. Because I know you mentioned when you went there that it was so empty in terms of crowds. But I found the thing on the Imagineering story about how they basically just put that in the water and like built land to be just really nutty. And I never heard that story. But I would love to know for you, I mean, how that park was, because I know it has some really great things going for it. But again, I really never hear about it except for, a few people I've talked with that worked on it. No one talks about it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know if we're going to discuss Shanghai, but it came in an interesting spot of my travels where I was realizing the kind of crazy ambition of this whole trip and this project. And I had been to 3 parks in less than a week, and I had traveled across the Pacific, and I had traveled across the U.S. I had done. It was just a whole lot, and I was already kind of feeling tired and sore. And by the time I got to Hong Kong, I think I was in a unique spot to really, really appreciate it for the understated park that it is. It's very understated, and it's the complete opposite of what I described with Tokyo Disney Sea in terms of being a fully realized park when it opened, and that was by design. But it really is one of those things where you go through it and you think about what that park was on day one, and you think, how could they have ever thought that people would have been happy coming to this with the amount of attractions that it had, or kind of the lack of attractions that it had? Because it's such a small footprint, but it's a beautiful park, and it's got this wonderful setting kind of in the mountains, right? So it's got this kind of big old hill or mountain behind the castle there, which is a really unique perspective. I'm not sure if it's the most effective perspective, because it does this kind of weird, in terms of the perspective of the castle, it makes it look even smaller than it already was. And when I was there, they were doing renovations to it. So the castle was actually mostly surrounded by construction walls, but even the little bit that I could see poking out of there, it was like, this was such an interesting choice given the setting and the backdrop of where they knew they were building this castle. But I ended up really, really, really enjoying it for what it was. And, they tried to kind of address the small, underdeveloped nature of the park by adding 3 kind of mini lands. So you get a Toy Story land, you get Mystic Point, which is where Mystic Manor is, and then you get Grizzly Gulch, which is kind of a Frontierland-esque mini land with just one big attraction that is kind of a similar to Big Thunder Mountain, but Big Thunder Mountain via Expedition Everest, and that it's got, these cool animatronics, and it launches you forward and backward and all this stuff. But I really, really loved those additions. Well, I didn't really care about Toy Story Land, but I loved the other additions. I really, really, really love Mystic Manor. I mean, that was an attraction I had heard all about, but I don't even think I really knew it was in Hong Kong. I had just heard about it, and then I saw it on the list of attractions when I was planning and said, oh yeah, that's where Mystic Manor is. And Mystic Manor really is just an awesome, awesome ride. But I was able to enjoy the park for what it was, and really take the time to enjoy myself in a way that I probably didn't get to do anywhere else. I mean, at one point I sat on a bench on Main Street, and I got something to snack on, and I just sat there, and I saw nobody. I actually took a video on my phone, and it's just a video of nobody walking by me, not a single person. And I don't think I'll ever have that experience again in a Disney park, probably. So I appreciated it for that. And, I'm not sure it's worth it's definitely not worth a trip to just go to Hong Kong Disneyland. But if you can swing it on a kind of the the Disney Asia loop. I think that big Disney fans will find something to love there.
I'm really interested in it, one, like you mentioned, for Mystic Manor and all of that, but it is kind of intriguing just because it's different to me because it had potential and it still does. It's not like the studios in Paris, though. I know both of them kind of were built on the half-day park kind of idea, but there is potential there. But it excites me. It's funny because the only time I've ever been in a Disney park that empty was pretty soon after 9/11. I was there in January, and it was like that, where we had pictures of signs that say 0-minute wait, and we'd be on our own boat of everything. And it's kind of cool, but I'm sure to do that, especially in a park you're not familiar with, you're kind of like, what's the deal? This is even stranger. But I do want to make sure we get to Shanghai, because I do want to ask you about that, being that it's new and it has some really cool attractions that a lot of us want to experience. One of them we're going to get to experience in the very near future, but not all of them. So what was it like for you going to Shanghai and seeing a different park?
Yes, I mean, that was my first international stop, and it was obviously the newest and the shiniest, and it's a really interesting park, and it's really beautiful, and they've really knocked a lot of the attractions out of the park. There were big time crowds when I was there, and I'm not sure if it was a fluke or whether this is how it normally is. So I actually did not reference this in the book, but when I got there, I checked into my hotel, so I did not stay at Shanghai. I stayed just down the road. There's a Courtyard Marriott that is honestly, it's 3 minutes away from Shanghai. And so I got there, checked in, was getting ready for the next day. I pull up the site just to confirm when the park is opening and everything. And there's a big giant banner at the top of the Shanghai Disney page that says, like, warning, if you do not have tickets for the Avengers Infinity War premiere, do not come to Shanghai Disneyland. So they just so happened to be doing the Chinese premiere of Avengers Infinity War while I was there, I guess. And so I don't know if that brought a bunch of people out thinking. I never saw even the smallest hint of it. They did it in the theater that's a part of Disney Town, which is the downtown Disney equivalent in Shanghai. And so I never saw any evidence of this premiere whatsoever, but it was apparently a thing. Yeah. So, I mean, I had to kind of deal with a lot of lines and I actually missed out on some stuff. So actually, there was some stuff down for refurbishment, but there was other things I just couldn't get to because of the lines. And I was there for two full days, from opening till close, both days. But regardless, the Tron coaster obviously is going to be a Magic Kingdom soon, and it is a very, very, very cool attraction. I mean, the only negative is that it is very short, but I think that's okay. I actually think that the whole experience is cool enough to kind of excuse the length. So that was a very, very fun attraction. Their Pirates attraction was really incredible. And I actually have a list in the back. I make some lists in the back of the book and where I say like what my favorite attractions are. And I say kind of what my favorite for each of the attractions that have multiple kind of, for your haunted mansions that are at multiple parks, what's my favorite version of them at which park. But I actually create a different category for Pirates, the new Pirates, because the new Pirates is it's on such a different level from the old Pirates that it didn't even feel fair to compare the two. It's this amazing, you start and it kind of is a very familiar experience to the Pirates that we're used to, but then the boats start moving and twisting and speeding up and slowing down and doing all these things that, do not seem natural, right? In this flowing water that you've become accustomed to with these types of boat rides. And then you kind of go into these amazing kind of huge IMAX scenes that take you underwater, which I was a little skeptical of because I know this is nothing new and it's probably an overdone thing, but I am a person who gets a little annoyed with the screen attractions, right? Like I like a physical set and I like all that stuff. And I think that this is another kind of great example of Disney doing it right. There's so many awesome, incredible physical sets and animatronics in this attraction that these kind of are a great complement to that experience. Even though some of the scenes you're looking at nothing except for the screen, it still is just such an amazing and complete experience that you kind of don't even realize that you're kind of looking at the screen. So that was very cool. And then the other, I think, big highlight, I would say, for me at least, was the challenge trails. So these are something that I just can't imagine anything like this will ever exist at the American parks. I don't know, maybe it will, but you wait in line, and when you get up there, they hook you up with a harness, and basically you're going through an elevated kind of obstacle course, ropes coursey kind of thing. There are different routes that you can take, and there's different kind of difficulty levels. And I mean, some of those difficulty levels are like pretty challenging. It was not super easy. I mean, I think it was things that most people could do, but I was a little out of breath at the end, and I was pretty sweaty from in the hot Shanghai weather. But it was just such a cool experience. And it's the Tom Sawyer Island experience, which I actually had not really done much in my life. I had not made the time to do it, and I made the time to do it at all these parks that had it this time. And when you do Tom Sawyer Island, I mean, that's also an interesting experience in that, like, you really are left to do whatever you want to do, right? You just kind of there. You might see an occasional cast member over there, but for the most part, you're just like doing whatever you want and going through these caves and doing whatever. And it's a very similar experience, except there's kind of a level of terror to some of it. I mean, some of it is made to be kind of scary. You are shimmying around these ledges with a big old drop. You drop into these rocky canyon below, and so you're doing all this stuff that's made to kind of be a challenge trail that is very kind of exciting and feels a bit dangerous. And so that was a very cool experience that I made the time to do a couple of times so that I could take different paths on my way through. And it was a very, very, very cool experience that I would highly recommend for anybody who makes their way out there.
Yeah, it's something where like DCA has that redwood trail.
Right.
And it's like if they did that, but they made it where you actually really climb the trees and walked across ropes.
That's exactly. Yes.
Just another level. But I've heard that's crazy. And then also Pirates. Yeah. I mean, I've watched the ride videos of Pirates, and it's kind of mind-boggling. You're like, I don't even understand. I mean, you could tell that's a screen, but it's a little bit like Flight of Passage, where I felt like I went into that going, because I just rode that for the first time in September, and I went into that going like, oh yeah, it's a screen, it's like Soarin', I'm sure it'll be great. And then I came out of that and I was like, what the heck? That was incredible.
I felt exactly the same way. I mean, I'm with, I think, probably most people who are tuned into all things pop culture these days, in that I'm a Avatar naysayer at this point. And I was very confused when all of this was announced. I mean, not necessarily from a business perspective in terms of like, on paper, it seems to make sense. This massively popular movie in terms of box office. Why would this not be a no-brainer to build a land around? But I was hugely skeptical, and I was hugely skeptical of Flight of Passage. But I was just so blown away by it, and I really think it's some of the best work they've ever done, and so it proves that those kind of attractions can be. And this is also coming from someone who, I know this is, I probably shouldn't even say this because I'll make some enemies. This is coming from someone who has never quite understood Soarin', or the popularity of Soarin'. I mean, I enjoy Soarin', but I always hear about how they're like it's one of the best reviewed rides and people love it. And I get it. It's definitely a neat ride. And I see it kind of has a cross-generational appeal and all of that. But when I heard people saying, "Oh, this is just like Soarin'," I was thinking, "Oh boy, this is." I don't know if this is going to be for me, but it was awesome.
Yeah, I love Soarin' over California. the more recent one, I'm pretty much with you. But before we finish, I want to just, if this works for you, I want to ask you just some really quick kind of rapid fire questions of your thoughts on the parks. Do you want to do this?
Absolutely.
Okay, so these are really tough questions. I don't know if you can handle it, but try your best. Okay.
Okay.
So which of these three do you think is the worst? Paris Studio Tour, Toy Story Land in Hong Kong, or the current version of Journey to Imagination?
Oh, I actually probably going to be maybe a surprising answer, and I'm probably going to go to the studio tour. I have some things I like about Journey to Imagination, even in its current form. But I don't know. There's not much you can forgive in the studio tour, other than Catastrophe Canyon, which is a fun kind of throwback.
I understand that completely. I just like the reaction there. Okay, so which Disney resort has, of all the ones you visited, has the best food?
Tokyo, definitely. I had some really, really great meals there. So I ate at Magellan. I know this is rapid fire, but
it's okay. This is how it always goes.
I'll keep it. I know. I'll keep it brief. But I ate at Magellan's when I needed it most. I was cold and wet, and from like that story I told, and I went to Magellan's and just had an amazing meal at Magellan's, and the price was unbelievable. I got a lunch. It was this 3-course lunch with my drinks included. So that was a soft drink and coffee after my meal, and included gratuity. And it was like $28. And so I was like, this is the best deal I've ever gotten in my life. And then the next day I did Blue Bayou, Tokyo Disneyland, had another amazing meal there. Again, that was a little more pricey, but it really wasn't that much more pricey. And then, I had just amazing snacks all over the resort. Really, really, really good food. So got to go Tokyo.
That's good to hear. $28, that might allow me to eat at like Columbia Harbor House now or something. That's about what I'll get you.
Exactly. I mean, that's what this was. Obviously, this was before I went back to Florida after hadn't been there since 2012 or whatever. Oh. And then, so that was a rude awakening. And then I went again in December, and it's. But I will tell you this, I shouldn't even share this because they're going to find out about this, and they may have already fixed it, but I love the Ohana bread pudding so much. It's like my favorite dish in the world. It's so good. But obviously I was traveling solo, and I was like, well, I don't really want to go to Ohana by myself and eat like 14 pounds of meat, but I do really want the bread pudding. So I went to Tambu Lounge out front of Ohana one night after the park, and I said, "Can I get a piece of the bread pudding?" This was right after. So I'd seen Happily Ever After. I ran out as fast as I could. I hopped on the boat over to the Polynesian. I ran in there and got in there just before like 10 o'clock, which was, I guess. I forget. I guess that was when Ohana was closing, maybe. I don't remember what I was rushing for, but I rushed over there. I get over there. I'm like, "Do you have the bread pudding?" And they say, "Oh, give us 1 second. We'll go check." So they come back and they're like, "We got one piece left and we'll sell it to you." I'm like, "Great." So I get my bread pudding, and then I proceed to get asked by every single person who walks by me, "Where did you get that bread pudding? I would like a piece of bread pudding." So then the poor bartender had to get asked by every single person that would walk up to him if they could get the bread pudding. But I get my bill, and they charge you $6 for that bread pudding. And I was like, this has to be the best deal. To be the best deal at Disney World, because, I mean, you get that huge piece of bread pudding, huge scoop of ice cream, all that stuff. I was like, you could barely get a Mickey bar for $6. I get this thing.
I will say something about bread pudding, because the best deal I got at Food and Wine was this gigantic bread pudding in Mexico that was like $5. And I don't even understand it, but it did not have ice cream and it was not Ohana. So I don't understand it either. Okay, well, I'm going to narrow this down because rapid fire never works like it was, but I'm going to ask two more. So which of these was your favorite? Mystic Manor, Journey to the Center of the Earth, or the Pirates of the Caribbean Battle of the Sunken Treasure?
This is a brutal, brutal question. So I can say that this is not the question, but the one that I rode the most was Mystic Manor. I rode it just so many times, and obviously that was a function of there not being anybody there, and so I could continue to ride it again and again and again. But I might go with I might go with Mystic Manor. I really, really, really loved it. And I think the climax of that attraction is it's just such an awesome idea, and it's so well executed. It's really, really a fun attraction. So I think I'd go with that.
Yeah, that's a tough choice. I thought you might go with that or with Pirates.
Yeah.
But, nothing against Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Journey's amazing too. But honestly, I think that 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is underrated, if anything, because I thought that was an amazing attraction too.
No, I've heard that before too. Okay, last question. If you were able to go back to one of the overseas parks, which one would it be? And I think I know the answer.
I know. I'm sorry to be repetitive here, but yeah, it's got to be Tokyo Disney Sea. I mean, it's a pretty amazing park. But I'd like to get back to all of them. I would like to do it in a different way. I would like to not do it as rapidly as I did, but I would really like to get back to all of them, because I think that all of them have really cool attractions, and they just have an interesting perspective in terms of kind of the interpretation of Disney, and really kind of, it's interesting to see the reflection of, going to Main Street USA in Hong Kong. It's a very interesting experience.
Yeah.
And so it's something that I think that people should try. I totally get it's a pipe, especially if you got a family and you got a lot of people to travel with. But I definitely encourage people to look into it and see if it's a feasible option, because I think there are surprising ways to do it on the cheaper than you would imagine.
Cool. Well, I enjoyed the book a lot. I kind of live vicariously through all your trips in the book, but it was a lot of fun. So this has been great. So if listeners want to pick up a copy of your book or just learn more, where should they go?
Yes. So the book is on Amazon. It's Around the Worlds in 80 Days, which was a funny title when I thought of it. It is less funny in the world of search engine optimization, because it definitely is not the first thing that pops up when you're looking for that. But and then they can follow me on Twitter. My handle is Dusty Engels, so it's DUSTYENGELS, and there is a link to the Amazon page in my bio there as well.
Awesome. Well, Dustin, this was a blast. I liked the book a lot, and it was really fun to talk with you. So thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Dan. This was so much fun. And like I said, I've been such a fan for a long time. And so this was really, really, really exciting to do. I appreciate the time.
If you enjoyed this episode, I'd recommend you check out my author interviews with guests like Jeff Bam, Katie Price, and Brian J. Jones. You can find all of those and a lot more at tomorrowsociety.com. If you'd like to support this listener-funded podcast, you could do so through Patreon and earn really cool perks like the monthly Tomorrow Society Bulletin podcast, which is solely for members. This month, I'm going to talk about the importance of physical spaces for attractions. I'm thinking about this in terms of Rise of the Resistance and a lot of the attractions that Disney's bringing in the future. That should come out in the next few weeks. My latest patron, I want to say thank you to Gino Church for helping to support the podcast. You can learn more by going to tomorrowsociety.com/member. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can follow me on Twitter at TomorrowSOC or Facebook or Instagram at Tomorrow Society. You can also send me an email, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. If you have any suggestions for guests or topics for 2020, I would love to hear them as I look to plan the upcoming year. The Tomorrow Society podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Dan Heaton. The music was written by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Have an amazing holiday. You may hear from me sooner than you think, but regardless, I will be back with new episodes next year.